Hello and welcome back to my stream. I'm edA-qa and I'm doing streaming on Fuse and UX. This is a mobile development and design tool for doing apps on mobile primarily. And today I will be playing with the layout features. I wrote most of these features, so hopefully I can give a little bit of insight in how they work and the ways we can use them. And I'll just do that by starting off with just doing some basic layout. I have the preview window open here, and in the back somewhere in Sublime I have my code open. I'll just keep this one on top so we can always see it, and then just move this one over. I'll move it back once I have the file opened. So with layout we're using a standard, well, it's a common layout engine where you lay out from the parents down. So in the application, we have an application, and here I just have a simple panel of fixed width. It's up in the upper right now. I'm just going to move it back to center to show how the basic centering works. Now, when we do something like center, what's easy to point out is that it's actually centered at the center. It's a kind of an odd comment, but we'll get back to it later what that makes sense. So we can also do bottom right, and then I'll go down to the bottom right. Now what might be interesting here is that I specified a fixed width and height. You don't have to have things of fixed width. And this has a lot of influence in how this alignment works. For example, if I take off the width and say alignment bottom right, suddenly it disappears. And this is because it's trying to align to the bottom right something that has no width. But if I were to take the right part off, take off that dimension, now you can see that you actually have something on the bottom there. Similarly, we can do it for the left side. So panel width equals 50, alignment equals left, color equals AFA or something. Now this is actually underneath the panel, it's not clipped, the one on top of it's behind it. If we made these both partially translucent, you can see that. You can see that they actually overlap. Now what's important about this here is that when I said bottom, on the top one I put bottom, and it has a height, because I didn't specify the other dimension, the other axis, it stretches, and this is a very common theme in the layout, is that when you don't specify the size and the dimension, it either collapses to that size or it stretches to that size, and that depends on the alignment. If I have an alignment that goes right, the moment I say alignment right or left, it suddenly has no size. And by saying just bottom, it means put this whole thing in the bottom, and since it has a height, it will have that actual height. Now some things have automatic size, so if you say text value equals I have a size, alignment equals top right. This has a natural size. Now what happens with natural size, by this is what I mean, the value itself, given this current font, has a size, and we're aligning that top right. This gives the element its size, whereas the panel above here, since they have no content, they have no size. So if you automatically align them, they'll simply have no space. So let's wrap this one in a color panel. I don't know, let's just make it FFA yellow. Nobody likes yellow, but it highlights well. Now actually I made a mistake here, but let's show what happens here first. If I do this, the whole screen is yellow. And this demonstrates that the panel with no sizing information will stretch to fill its parent entirely. And this is not what we want in this case, but that's its default behavior, is to stretch to fill its parent. So let's put that in the top right and remove it from the text. Okay. Now this goes into the next sizing mode, and this was actually rather tricky to get working. Is this panel, it has an alignment, and this means it's going to shrink to its natural size, but it itself doesn't have a size, but its children have a size. The child is a text element, it has a natural size, and so the panel will actually collapse to that size. So see, if we increase the size of the font, it'll get bigger. Now this is where something like padding comes in too. If we put a padding to this padding adds to the content size. This text has a natural size, and so this padding also has a size. Okay, this is very different than a margin. If you notice, the padding includes the size in the background. Now if you put a margin on, this size does not apply to the background because this element, the panel, is actually only this part that's yellow, and the margin means how far away is it from the other items it's positioning. Whereas the padding, you can also have padding and margin, says how much space inside of it is where the content go. And so this shows the basic alignment, basic top alignment, the basic sizing. Now with the basic panel like this, everything is just going to overlap. Now let's add another one. Let's add a wrapping panel, a dock panel, to show how this works a bit first. Okay, I just want to quickly check something on the stream. It should be working. Okay. Streaming very interestingly. Now, in a normal panel, everything overlaps. And in a dock panel, by default, everything overlaps as well. But a dock panel has areas that you can attach to. So we can say panel dock equals top. I'm going to make a black panel. And I'll say we're going to align something in the center of this panel. And we're going to need a different color here now. Text color. So it might be font color. I don't change the color very often. Make it white. Wow. Problems here somewhere. What did I type wrong? Font color does not have a property called font color, so I was correct with text color. Okay, there we go. You'll have to excuse the rendering quality of the title. I have a MacBook Pro and they don't actually work very well with external monitors, which I'm working with now. They somehow totally screw up the font rendering, especially when they're small things. But in any case, it's well enough for us. We see the title. You notice this I have a size part moved down. This is because now with a dock panel, we've taken away the part. This part at the top is saying, okay, we have something at the top, let's take this size away from here. And if we increase the font size again here, you might see this a bit better, 24, and it moves it down again. Now this is how we can use a dock panel to solve the problem of this left and the bottom one overlapping. Instead of saying alignment left, we can dock this panel to the left, which is very similar to alignment left in a dock panel, but now they don't overlap. Because when you take items, you dock them in a dock panel, the space actually disappears for them, so you actually have less and less space for the panel in the middle. What I can actually do is, right at the top for the panel in the middle, let's put a rectangle showing the available space width. Stroke width equals 1, stroke color equals. Alright, that's going to be a bit hard to see, so let's do 2 and let's do some atrocious color. Okay, blue. And it's kind of hiding a bit. Okay, but you can see the area of the space that's left over, and it's actually kind of bugging me that I don't see it on the bottom. I'm going to actually have to look into this. I was expecting to see it on the bottom, unless it's because of this thing here. No, this might actually be a layout issue in the preview that is going down too far. We should actually be able to see that. A question about programming in fiction. My favorite book in programming fiction. Actually, I haven't read a book in programming for a long time. I have to admit that. I just read a lot of web pages. Fiction? I don't know. I read a lot of science fiction, and that's about all I can say for that. I just forget the last names, and I'm terrible with names of books, so Okay, about this stroke color here, stroke width, this is something I actually have to look at. I would expect to see it at the bottom here. If I make it darker, would we see more? So there's something actually missing here in the rendering. And I'm going to have to follow that up in later with an issue, I think, because I don't know where this. I've not seen this problem before. But it might just be one in preview, and it might be because I'm using this compact mode. I'll have to see. Okay, but in any case, what I want to show is this area here is what's selected. Whereas if we didn't have this docking left, we put alignment left here. You notice the cyan border shifts to the left because we haven't taken space out of the available area. When we dock it, it actually takes space away. Same if we did docking bottom instead. Now, so you can see the border on the bottom here on the cyan, which I was expecting before. But now what's interesting is the ordering of this matters. I did a box one at the bottom first, and you can see it takes up all the bottom space, and then the leftover space is up top, and then the left one takes up some of the leftover space. If we were to move this to the top, you'd see how the overlap in the corner now changes, because we're giving priority to the left one. The left one's taking up space, and then the right one's taking up space. And this is the way the dock panel works, is it's a subtractive model. Every time you dock something, you take away a little bit of space. You can also see that on the top, where we dock to the top first, and you would expect the same thing to happen if I put the dock for the top below the left one. The left one gets priority. And this gives a variety of layouts there. What I didn't show is everything that's left over. It doesn't matter where it is. Let's put another something in the center. Let's put a circle in the center. Just do 75. Height equals 75. Color equals 8. Everything else left over in this, regardless of where it is just aligned in the normal space. It has a default layout. Now they are on top of each other. So if I put this one, alignment equals top. Note the default alignment is center. It's not really. It's on top. And this is because it comes before the text. Alright, the text is there. It's clear if I put it down here. If I were to put it below it, it would go behind it. Now sometimes you actually need this order, but you still want things behind it or in front of it, so you could change the Z offset of one of the other panels. And I had this problem in the previous issue that I have to actually follow up on. In preview, if we're changing the offset sometimes, it doesn't quite work. Okay, now it works. So, there we go. Sorry, that was fine. So, this is technically on top of the text, but I put the text at a higher Z offset, so it appears in front of it. I should be able to put it behind it as well, except this is actually, I think, the bit that's actually broken. Okay, so I'm going to stop playing with that because I had to follow up a defect on there. I tried to follow it up once before, but I had a bit of an issue that I wasn't clear on what was happening. Okay, yeah, now if I remove both of them it works, but it's not exactly what I wanted. But back to the layout, I really wanted to show that if we put this in the center, all this other stuff which isn't docked sits in the rest of this area. Now, so dock panel is a subtractive model. As we dock things, we have less and less space to work with. And this is in contrast to a stack panel. And a stack panel actually adds to it. As you add to a stack panel, it takes up more and more space, or each item just piles on top of each other. And to show this layering, let's put a stack panel in the left side. You can actually directly dock the stack panel to the left. And now we're going to take off the width. I'm going to say, hey, look, there's no width. And since it has no width, it disappears entirely because it has no content now. Now if I start adding some text, this gives a stack panel actual size. And it gives it a width in particular. And because we want some padding, we'll add some padding so the text isn't directly lined up. Now what you should note about this is that we docked it to the left, and it has a width, but it still takes up the entire left side. This is something we actually normally want, because it's going to be auto in one dimension. When we say dock left, what we're basically saying is like, look, it's going to take up the whole left side, and you're going to automatically calculate the width. Getting these algorithms working in the code it's not so tricky, but there's a lot of little details to worry about. In particular when it comes to optimization, that all of this has to be done in one pass so that if we animate this, it doesn't go horribly slow. We can try animating this right now. Animating the width is a bit... let's just do it this way. Let's animate the size. To font size. Animating text is one of the slower things you can do, just because it takes a while to calculate the text. Oops. So I'm just going to find a way to animate that size so we can see that the whole layout's actually animating. Exports dot font size is what I wanted. Let's start at text 32. Okay. Trying to think, this was probably not the best way to animate the size. I didn't need to actually change that. That was kind of silly of me. I could have done it this way instead. Let's just use a change animator. Forget about the binding. Which wasn't quite working correctly anyways. I'm going to have to check that. What was that? Sorry, I got curious. Alright, that works. So, let's change it back to 32. And I'm going to put a while visible in here now. So while it's visible, I want to cycle something. And its name is one-text. Target equals one-text dot font size. What cycle does is it cycles the it animates a value using a waveform. So we're going to say the low size is going to be 15 and high is equal to, let's just go 40, won't go too high. And so it's animating that. And you can see the whole layout change. This is fairly fast, which I'm fine with. And let's animate to text as well. Now this is what's called a layout animation. And you can see the whole thing animates the layout, and this would be a relatively expensive calculation, except we've heavily optimized the code to deal with this type of layout animation. We can do a similar thing on the bottom here, that while it's visible, actually just put a clicked handle on it this time, clicked. Change, and let's give it a name. Bottom panel. Changed over 2 seconds. So if I click this, it's going to slowly animate the bottom panel. Very exciting, isn't it? This is horrible, but what I'm showing, this is all a layout animation, and so these aren't scaling, and you can see that in the text. This text isn't being scaled, it's actually resizing and re-rendering at all of these sizes. And what we might want to have to show this even more, let's go to this text in the top right corner. We're going to put some text wrapping on this now. Text wrapping equals wrap. And I want to put a max width of 100 on here. Let's see if that actually works. There. And we can see it wrapping now. If I had max width of 200, okay, that's good. We have a nice range. We can stick another while visible on here. I like to keep these local to the elements that are actually animated. You could actually put them all in one, but this is better if you're doing components. And we're going to change this panel now. Give it a name again, text panel. Actually, I don't need this. Sorry, I can just do text panel dot max width. Okay. Sorry, this was supposed to be a cycle, not a change. Cycle. And a cycle requires an explicit target. You can't use your short syntax, and we'll say low equals 100, high equals 200. There's no duration on cycle. Now this isn't so exciting when you cycle the max width. Because it's a maximum width, this text is just going to render in the size, and if it doesn't have enough size, it's going to wrap. But the maximum doesn't affect the actual size. But I just wanted to do this to show how these really lay out, and they change the layout of the text as well. And this is different from a transform. And let's show that with a transform instead. Let's take out this while visible. Take out the max width. Let's put a clipped handler on here. And we have a scale which uses a transform. Scale factor equals, let's do 5, duration equals 0.5. So now if I click, if you notice, this is an actual layout change. The rest of the layout doesn't change. You can tell by the way the font rendering is. It's actually just zooming in on the font. We're still letting the other one change. And so this is the difference between a layout change and just a normal transform. The transforms don't affect the layout in any way. You can transform things all you want, and the layout's just the same. And this can be used for various effects. Let me get rid of some of the cycling first before it drives me crazy. Okay, we won't have that. This covers a lot of the basics of layout and the subtractive model, and how the scroll view or a stack panel is additive and in a scroll view. And I'm going to put a circle on the scroll view now to show another aspect of layout. Color, just make it black this time. This circle here won't show up, and that's because it has no height. And in a stack panel, as it's adding items, because the default is a vertical stack panel, it's going to ask the items itself, well, what height do you have? And it's actually, in this case, asking for its width because it's aligned to the left. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, but if we add a height to the circle, what happens here is because the text has width, this also ends up giving the circle width, because the whole size of the stack panel has an entire width. And if I just specify the height of the circle, it says, well, I'm going to use the entire width, and I'll take that height as well. We can make this more clear by actually making a panelist height instead, 20. Let's make a, well, no, not a completely white panel. And now you can see the actual white, or the somewhat white area, the gray area beside it. This again shows that the panel itself takes up 20 height. So this panel is this little gray area here. It takes up 20 height, and it just takes up the whole width of the stack panel. The little spaces on the side are coming from the padding. This is because we put padding there. We wanted the text there. And that'll apply to this panel as well. And we gave it a height of 20, and so because we only specified height, it means the width will be automatic, and the width automatic is to fill it up. And then the circle expands to this whole area. What you can't actually see in circle, though, is that it is, the control itself is filling the whole area, but because it's a circle, it keeps that size. If we were to use an ellipse instead, okay, something went wrong there. Trying to use an ellipse. Let's make sure it picked it up. Okay, now why is that not working? Okay, something took a while to reload, and I'm not sure why. Let's put that back to black. Now, what I wanted to show with ellipse is that it shows that it does take up that whole area, whereas the circle only took up a little part of the area. The circle control itself does take up the whole area, but the circle will only draw an actual proper circle in there. Now this is all looking a little bit garish, so let's remove the circle, or maybe I can just leave it for now. You can use these as little dividers if you wanted. I don't know if that's really helpful, but let's go back to that circle in the middle. Now this is another layout problem that comes up. What if we actually wanted that square, like the circle has an aspect ratio of 1. What if we wanted that for a whole panel? So in the center here, instead of doing a circle, let's say we want a grid, and this is another layout type. Say column count equals 2, row count equals 2. So it's a 2 by 2 grid. And we're just going to give it a bunch of colors to it. Little simple panels. Okay. Now I have to figure out why that's not reloading. When I click on it, it reloads, otherwise it does not. We can give these all a margin to show they're just so they don't have the same color. Oops. I could change the color or give them margin if you're trying to show they take up the space. Now what if I wanted these all to be the same size, and by that I mean the same aspect ratio? By default, this grid will expand to take the whole area. Let's just take this out for now so you can see that. And we still have the animation down here, so you notice it still takes the whole area, it always expands. We have a second layout mode, and this is called aspect. And this is a bit weird naming, but I'll just explain why. Fill aspect. Okay. What box sizing fill aspect is? It says box sizing says what fundamentally is my layout mode. The default one is what we've been showing before. Default is how the items are interpreted. Whereas box sizing equals fill aspect says, look, regardless of what happens, I want this grid to follow an aspect ratio. What I haven't shown here is that there's a default aspect of 1. And this basically says this grid should expand to fill up its area, but it should have an aspect ratio of 1. This also works if it's aligned. Okay. And there, if we do that, we have no size, right? Because I did 2 axes again, so I can only align it in one direction when I have that. Top takes up the full size, or I could take right. Right's more apparent if I change the preview window size. There you go. Let's just leave it in the center for now. Center might actually break it. Yeah. Center breaks it because that expects the full size again, and I have to look up again. There is a way to align it up and down, but let's just leave it for this for now. And now if we click on the bottom one, the grid will move, but it doesn't change size because it still has enough space to be centered. But we can shrink it down to the point where it doesn't have enough. And as we do a layout size, now it'll actually shrink the size of the grid. Now, if you're watching carefully, you'll notice it jitters. This jittering is actually intentional, because what's happening is by default, all of these items are being snapped to the nearest pixel boundary. It doesn't have, it doesn't use a continuous size, it uses discrete steps. If for whatever reason you don't want that, you can actually start turning off snap to pixels. But you have to turn it off on all the things you don't want snap to pixels on, because all of them lay out on their own. Now you notice the jittering is basically gone, because this will actually be over partial pixel boundaries. This is not the default, because this actually has a significant cost in terms of clarity, because nothing will be aligned at boundaries. Your borders will be aliased because they go over partial pixels. So generally turn it off. The reason we have it there is for when things need to be aligned perfectly, such as a circle in a box. Let's show that one then as well. Let's do this one at the top. Let's put a circle in a box. And you can probably understand maybe the reason why we have to do snap to pixels false sometimes for visuals. So let's do a rectangle at the top. Alignment equals top. And in this case, I'm going to start making something a bit more fancy. I'm going to do another duck panel. And we're going to put its alignment equals top. And we'll make like a little pop-up text item for this. Alignment equals top. And the rectangle now, we're going to make this the background. Make it a dark gray. Let's give it a corner radius. Let's just say 10 for now. Actually, I'm gonna make it a. This is way more than I can actually support, but by support I mean the visuals are too small to show that entire docking. That entire radius, I mean. This will be a pop-up notice. And we want the alignment to be top center. And I have nothing. Have I put it behind something accidentally? No. Okay, why don't I have anything here? Oh, that's weird. Okay, and it just didn't refresh again. Now, this kind of, if you're using corner radius, you kind of want to put padding in here. So let's give it a bunch of padding. Now, you don't always want the padding to be the same, so let's give it a higher padding for X than Y. And this looks more like what we want. Of course, the notice itself is a bit bright, dark, so let's make it brighter. Make the actual text color higher contrast, so we can actually see that. We wouldn't want such a notice to be right on the top as well, so we might want to say the margin is 5, so we'll put it a little bit away from there. Okay, now I want to get back to why we might use snap to pixels. Let's say we put a circle on the left here, and there's a reason I made this a duck panel. I put a circle. And let's just first say the width is 50. I'm going to put it in the left. Okay, I should have said that's a bit too high. Let's say height equals 50 instead. Well, that's a bit weird. It disappeared on me. It's because it has no width. Sorry, this has to have a width. Because I'm docking it to the left, it has to have a width, otherwise it'll just collapse to 0. Now you'll notice with dock panel, why I use a dock panel though, is that this essentially lays out the dot. It takes away the space that the text might want to use. And And you might want to add a spacer. You could also dock this equals left, width equals 5. Put some space between the dot and the notice. You can also do this with margins, and it's actually faster with margins. I mean, slightly faster. But sometimes it's easier to just put spacer elements in. Like I said, let's do this margin equals 0, comma. I always get this wrong. There we go. Left, top, right, bottom. That's usually the way. So X, Y, X, Y. And now this leaves a space. Now let's make it a bit bigger. Now this is kind of hard to notice on this display, I guess. And I'm trying to show a situation where the snap to pixels is really important. So let's put a circle inside this circle. Let's see if I can get it right. This could actually be a problem with the monitor only having a density of 1, 2. So my points are mapping exactly. Okay. So you notice it has a nice clean border there. This is what we'd like to keep. If you see, the border is the same size all the way around the circle, which is what we really want. But if I were to put in something like 16.5, now you can see the problem. I know it's really small, but if you can notice, you notice it's slightly off to the right. And this is because this pixel aligned it. So the circle in the middle and the circle on the outside are both aligned to pixels. And this is where you might want to say snap 2 pixels equals false. We're like, no, we more care about the alignment here than the crispness. And so now it'll actually have that continuous border on it. And you'd probably want to do the same thing on this one. It just so happens we're getting a bit lucky that it's laying out all right. But now we can actually work with partial sizes here. We can say, look, 20.5. Okay, it's really hard to see the difference here. This becomes really an issue on higher density devices like what most phones are, and my MacBook, but not actually this monitor. Because the pixel alignment and the actual point size will not line up the same. These widths here are specified in points, not in pixels. Some references for like Android, I think, actually calls them device-independent pixels instead of points. A little bit weird, just get used to the terminology. We always use pixels to mean device pixels, never logical pixels, and points are points, and everything we specify is in points. So here we have a simple pop-up. Notice what you might want to do, and this is how I use dock panel. The dock panel to make the little circle, take away the space. And on the grid, I used a box sizing fill aspect to make sure it's always square. And this is quite a few examples here. I'm going to remove the JavaScript, I don't need it. Various layout. And the dock panel is a very common one. The dock panel is really useful when you have spaces like this. If you want to do like an image for like a profile item, you say the profile image is to the left and the rest of the text is over to the right. That's commonly where the dock panel is used. And the grid for squares, just if you need square items. Trying to think what else I wanted to look at today. The one other interesting thing about the alignment maybe is how you can align things around something else. So let's say on this grid, we want to put a footer on this grid. Now actually, it's not the best way to do it, but if you know you're going to have space in the top and bottom, we want to say bottom of grid. And we're going to put this in layer equals overlay. Alright, and it's arranged somewhere over there. I make it a bit bigger as well. 32. So obviously not at the bottom. First off, what overlay does is overlay says it's similar to background, except it's in the front. And it's not aligned by the grid. When you have layout equals overlay, it ignores the fact that it's in a grid and just says I'm going to use the normal layout rules, what we actually call default layout rules. And we actually want this at the bottom. Bottom center. Kind of what we want. But that's not where we really want it. We actually want it below the grid. And we want to actually make a nice panel around it, or a rectangle, so we can see it a bit better. Let's put a translucent rectangle. Actually, that'll be bad if I put it on the bottom of the grid. Let's do AFF. And this goes on the bottom. Corner radius equals 5. Why not? Padding equals 10, 5. Oops. Must have made a mistake somewhere. Right there. Okay. So this is aligned at the bottom of the grid. Let's make it a bit more opaque. Now let's give it a black border. Stroke width equals 1 so we can see it even clearer. Okay, so you can see it looks like it goes beyond the bottom of the grid only because we have a margin on all these elements here. You can actually give the whole grid a color as well, and then you see that it's actually not going beyond the bottom of the grid. Let's give it a darker color. So you can see the bottoms now line up. It's just a visual anomaly here that it looks like the line goes below it. Okay. Let's make this a little bit easier to see. Now what I want to show with this bottom is that, what if we want to put this actually below the grid? This can get very difficult in other frameworks, but what I added here, because this always bugged me a lot in frameworks, is I added the anchoring function. I'm going to show you what the result is that we want and then explain to you how it works. This moved it off to the bottom. This has to do with what anchor means. Anchoring is saying what part of this element is actually the part we're positioning. So 50% means I'm positioning 50% of the x and 0% of the y. It's the point right here. And the alignment is saying, well, where am I positioning that? Except alignment is special. Alignment does two things. Alignment specifies both, and move this down so you can clear, see it. Alignment shows the x and the y. So bottom center actually means this normally. 50%, 100%. Come on. Alignment is an unexpected token. Well, that's a bit odd. I think that's a remnant. Let's just refresh everything. Alright, sorry. It has to do with the x. No, I don't want a new subline. It's x equals y, obviously. It's not x. This is, I mentioned in another show that I actually want to have something positioned, but we don't have that yet, so we use x and y. But this bottom of center is actually saying, come on, it's really saying where it's doing it. It's disappeared. Alright, okay. This is going to be a bit difficult to show. I know what I did wrong. Bottom center says this. But this is all relative, so this is actually the same here. But you can't have two alignments. So if I remove this one, this bit here is equivalent to bottom center. Let's actually make a second one that does this to show the equivalence. Let's take stroke width equals 1. I should just do a circle. Big red dot. Alignment equals bottom center. And I forgot to set the layer. Our big red dot is hard to see because it's not big. It's not so red. What I'm trying to show here is that the bottom center here means the same thing as this down here. The alignment, top left, x equals 50%, y equals 100%, and equals 50%, 100%. Alignment by default encodes a lot of information in itself. If you take out the alignment top left, this should also work. Because the moment you specify x and y, the alignment shifts to top left. And this is more of a technical detail. This is just because that's what you expect. If I say x equals 50%, I mean 50% across and 100% down. You can override the alignment and say center, but this is where weird stuff happens, because what you're saying is that this x is now 50% from the center and 100% down. This is why it ends up over here. So normally you wouldn't use alignment and x, y at the same time. Now this anchor is saying, well, which part of the element am I lining up? And when I say bottom center, I'm implicitly saying 50%, 100%. This is saying this blue section, the science section called bottom of a grid, what part I actually want at the bottom center is the bottom center of that element as well. This usually makes sense, right? But what if you don't want that? You couldn't say that this is what we said before. It's like, well, no, I don't want that. I actually want the top of this element to be aligned at the bottom. So this is where I put 0%. I say, look, the top. And we can do the same one here. Let's set the anchor of this one. And that also aligns it. But what if we want to show the actual point where it's aligning? So we take this. Now this is perfectly centered on that anchor point. This is at the bottom center point, and we're saying the center of this element is at the center of the bottom point. And this allows you to put things around the edges of your controls, which is sometimes very helpful for layout. You don't have to push it all the way down. You can say the anchor here is I don't want 0%, maybe I want a little bit of overlap. So there's a lot of captioning, so we might want to say 35. There's a lot of captioning that is this type of stuff. And let's get rid of the circle again. So this lets us overlay the bottom of the grid slightly with the other items. Let's put a margin on this grid because it's stuck to the sides too closely. So this basically lets us caption at the bottom of the grid by positioning something at the bottom slightly overlapped. And it's still part of the grid element. And this is important because that's where we want it to be relative size to. It's actually relative to this size. And that lets us get it down to the bottom, and this is the basics of how anchor works. I think that about covers what I want to do. Obviously there's some more questions. If you have questions, just ask me and I can do another stream about any of these. I wanted to show a lot of how it does, mainly about anchor and about how the layout does. And we still have this animation here. This is getting a bit slower. And this is actually primarily, I think, because my MacBook's getting overloaded now with with the streaming. It's getting really loud, the fan. I don't know if you can hear that yet. But this type of layout animation, there's a lot of ways we can optimize this as well. This is optimized fairly well here, and as we move things around, it gets more and more difficult. But in most programs, you don't actually have a layout like this, but we can show how you can optimize that later. And so I showed a dock panel. Let's go back. I showed a dock panel. A dock panel does this whole layout, typical application layout. You have the title. You might have something to the side. In a future one, we can look at Edge Navigator, where we actually have something sliding in and out. We have a bottom. Then we have a grid, and it's perfectly square regardless of the size, and that's why we did it with box sizing, fill aspect, and that guarantees that it says, look, of the size I have available, just give me the biggest size, which is square. And then to get this bottom of grid item, we did this, put another one in the overlay. The overlay says this is not part of the grid. And then we use this anchoring. We said x equals 50%, put it in the middle, down at the bottom 100%, and anchor it at 50%, 35%, so that's the item right there. And that was equivalent to saying bottom center with the anchoring points at the same position. Alright, that's all I wanted to cover. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, you just post them later or post them to the Fuse forums and we'll get back to it. Or if you have something you'd like to see in the show, just let me know and I can cover it. Otherwise, I'll go on and just cover various topics. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel or follow me on Twitter. And thank you very much for watching, and that's what I have for today.